welcome to our analytics webinar series. Delighted that so many of you could join us on this Wednesday morning. This is actually our fourth in our series of analytics webinars. We've gone on a journey through workforce planning to benchmarking to visualizations, and today we'll be talking about kind of how you can use data to think about reskilling in the age of automation, and what does that mean for HR functions, and what are some use cases. January, I hope you join us, how to keep people happy, and we'll be looking in February at high-performing teams. If you've missed any of the webinars that we've run previously, you'll find them on the links, and you'll be able to go back and watch those or share those with other team members as well. So I can just hear a few beeps as a few more people are joining, but let's just kick off with some introductions. So your team today, we have a fabulously international team for today to talk about this topic, and I think it kind of represents what a global issue this is. So my name's Sarah Kane. You'll find my picture on the left-hand side there. I'm a partner in people and organisation practice in PwC, and I'm based in Switzerland. And Linda.
Yeah, sitting next to you, Sarah, also in Switzerland, Zurich today. I'm Linda Vos. I'm part of our global people analytics team, and I'm coming from a data background, but focused really on HE topics.
Great. And Sabina, where are you this morning?
Hi, good morning. I'm located in the Amsterdam office here in the Netherlands. So I'm also a senior manager in the people and organization practice, and working on people strategy and modernizing the HR function. So I was very happy to be able to join today.
Great, thanks, Sabina. And then going right to the other edge of the world, Alexander, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for having me. I'm from the Australian People Analytics and Workforce Planning practice, and really excited to be here today and talk about our passion.
Perfect. It's not early for you at all, right? This is
about dinner time, but really good to be here.
Good for you to join us. Thank you. So what are we going to do in the next hour? So normally we kind of make these webinars last about 45 minutes, and I think we ran over last time. What you'll see on hopefully you've got the WebEx event open. What you'll see on your right-hand side at the bottom is there is the opportunity to ask questions. Please, we don't actually on the live recordings we don't get many direct questions in there, so please do feel free to we love it when you ask us or challenge us about stuff, because it just means that we're answering the stuff that's really interesting for you. And so please do come and share your questions on there for us. So we're going to be giving a bit of a sort of scene setter in terms of reskilling in the age of automation, and taking you through a little bit of a framework in terms of what a competency modeling kind of process framework structure can look like. And then really the bulk of the time today will be spent on a couple of demonstrations. One really in the context of workforce planning, and the other really around how do you look at your organisation and the emerging skills that you might need in the future, and how technology can help you do that. And then we'll just conclude, hopefully we have time, with a sneak preview on January, how to keep your people happy. That's the one I've been looking forward to all along, I think. So.
Good. So here is my favorite slide. I mean, for the ones of you that participated before, you might recognize it. And why do we like this slide? Actually, because in all the conversations we have with our clients, you can talk about people analytics and the art of the possible using this slide, because there are, as we've been discussing before, there are really useful use cases around business intelligence and benchmarking, etc., and creating basic insights from your data. That's more on the left-hand side. Today's topics are really on the right-hand side. So how can we use let's say, statistical and machine and learning modeling concepts to help HC in order to prepare and be fit for the future, let's say.
Okay, so let's do a little bit of scene setting now. So it's quite interesting. It's pretty hard to open up a newspaper or a journal these days without seeing some headlines around how automation is going to change jobs, how people are going to need to acquire new skills in the future. And there is one study that we were just reviewing as we were preparing for this webinar that's sharing the data that says by 2030, which isn't that far away, they're estimating that, you know, up to nearly 400 million workers will need to switch occupational categories and start to think. And honestly, even this week I was with a finance team of a global organization, and they're just doing a restructure, and they're looking, actually, they believe that they can reduce their workforce in that finance function by up to 70% of workers, which means that there's really this huge need to really think about reskilling, retraining, and around what those jobs of the future are. And we see organisationally that organisations really need to think differently and holistically about how their organisation should shift for the future. Interestingly, so you may have seen we just launched our most recent version of our Future of Work study. And one of the really promising and optimistic things about that is we're seeing an upward trend in terms of the percentage of people who are looking and recognising that they will need to train, and that they're entering this era of lifelong learning. So in this context, we're really seeing this notion of shifting occupations, you know, people needing to acquire new skills and capabilities, new ways of working, and even kind of new concepts and new ideas about employment and careers.
It's interesting that that has been mentioned in our survey. Do you also see that there in your daily conversation with clients it's becoming more important compared to 5 years ago? We're also talking about this topic, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference based on your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the awareness from organisations of the need to work out what are those skills and capabilities that they'll need in the future is absolutely there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really where it starts. You know, how is it going to shift? So whether I'm an insurance business who sees that actually I'm not going to need the same volume of claims processing people versus what will they go to? What capacity, what capability will be able to have in the future? And I think a lot of organisations are starting to wrestle with that. And then the question is, what do you do about it? How do you actually create that shift? I was in Luxembourg last week, and I think what's interesting, we were talking to the government of Luxembourg, and they're starting to organise around a government and a governmental response to this as well, where they're starting to pilot with about 30 different companies a process which starts with essentially a strategic workforce planning initiative, and then goes through to skill building and capability building to get that shift of workers. So I think we're seeing it in organisations, but we're seeing actually organisations and regulatory bodies and governments also start to respond to this as well and start to think about how we can make this shift happen.
Perfect. I think having said that, it's quite clear that we need and that organizations need to change and need to prepare for that. And what we have seen and what we've been working on and where we're focusing on today is really on how could data analytics help you with that topic. So having said that, I will be very happy to give the floor to Sabine in Amsterdam to guide you through the main concepts of what they have been developing of competency modeling.
Yeah, I'm putting the presentation on the screen now. As already indicated in the introduction, a question that a lot of our clients are asking now is, how do I transform my workforce such that I have the right people to execute my strategy? And we see that a lot of companies are struggling with this question because they can't really predict on a long-term basis what is required from their workforce. So in traditional strategic workforce planning, we make predictions of the future workforce based on demographics and financial data. Now we also see organizations increasingly are interested in knowing the competencies that of their current and their future workforce, and whether they're the right ones and which ones they need the most in the future. So therefore, we discussed internally at PwC that we wanted to innovate our SWP approach by also including competency modeling, because just looking at the numbers wasn't telling us enough. We really wanted to know who are the people we need for the jobs of tomorrow. So what you see here in this slide are three different people with three different jobs. But if you go a level deeper, you see that they share the same core competencies: balance and movement. So it's something to consider. When you need more service in the future, it makes more sense to reskill a ballerina into service than trying to reskill me. So assessing the competencies of your workforce to competency profiles, how does that work? So we believe in competency modeling because it allows us to look beyond jobs, beyond functions, departments, and individuals. It gives us insights and competencies of the current workforce, but it also allows us to assess the effects of the technological developments on the workforce, and it includes our scenario planning. So it means we can plan for different scenarios, like how it is in day-to-day work. You never know exactly what's going to happen, so it's also nice to be able to foresee different scenarios of the future. So what we do with the competencies is that we map the competencies of your current workforce based on their jobs. We will create then groups of people in our tooling that are similar to each other on competency level. And these people may not have the same job and may not work in the same department or location or in the same team. But if you go a level deeper, they have the same competencies. So it gives you really a nice insight in which people can potentially be reskilled and retrained to another position in the future. So how does it work exactly then? So we, in mapping competencies, we look at knowledge, skills, and abilities that belong to a job and map them then on your employees. Then we create a cluster analysis based on categorizing it, the job in that way, and that creates a mathematical perfect group of individuals with minimal differences between groups and maximal differences between groups. So it means that we try to distribute the jobs according to their skills and competencies and abilities, and helps us then to define which employee can potentially then fulfill the job of another employee. So how does that then work? We tested this in a pilot because we thought, okay, it's nice to talk about it, and in theory it would work. We used science also to support us, but let's try it then in real life. A pilot. We did this on a fictional data set. We created 35 jobs at an airline company with 120 competencies, and the result was that we could identify 8 competency profiles in total, which means then 8 clusters in mathematical terms. When you look at the first cluster, the operations research analyst and the aerospace engineer, these people never see each other in the office. The one works on the ground and the other in finance. So at the first glance, you would think, oh, why would I even consider that they could take over each other's jobs? But when you look at the deeper level, on the competency level, the knowledge and application of mathematics is their shared core competence. So if you need more operation research analysts in the future, it might be really worthwhile to consider to reskill an aerospace engineer to one. So how does it then work, looking also at the automation probability of jobs? Because we know jobs are really under pressure of the technological innovations, as also mentioned in her in her introduction, about 400 million jobs will change in the upcoming years. So we need to do something about that, and to assess which jobs will probably change or disappear in the future due to these technological innovations. We also included then automation probabilities, and these automation probabilities are based on scientific research as well. So what you see here is one cluster, and the administrative service manager in this case has a high automation probability, whereas the industrial production manager has a low automation probability. So hence it would make sense to consider to retrain one to the other job towards the future.
I think with this great first demonstration, we go over to our Australian colleague. Are you still connected?
Yes, still here. Thank you so much. So thank you for also the discussion, because I think we'll see an overlap between the next part of the session and this discussion. So what we will show you in a minute is a new platform we're partnering with, which is called Fathom. And Fathom is Celtic for embracing the future. But before we go into that platform and the video that we prepared for you, I would like to take a step back and just wonder why are we looking at these tools and the future of work. And we've, for instance, had a conversation with a client yesterday, and you can see that most organizations are quite comfortable with predicting the impact of current technology over the next year or two. But what Fathom will show you is a more macro, long-term view on technologies that we're beginning to understand the impact, but we can definitely take that longer-term lens on it. What Fathom does is it uses assisted machine learning, and in the video we'll explain a bit more and afterwards, but it uses assisted machine learning to map these roles and especially skills, hundreds of skills based on expert views, and calculate probability that a particular role will be impacted within the next 5, 10, 15 years by advanced automation, talking about AI and robotics. So that's the lens that's applied. But furthermore, and as per the previous discussion, it also looks at, okay, how do you move from A to B? What kind of roles sit around the role that is going to be highly impacted, that has, for instance, a 90% chance of being impacted or removed completely through automation? And what kind of roles sit around that are not as likely impacted, and what kind of skills do you need to elevate with these people, these roles, to get them to that role where you want them to be? So I think this is the time where we can switch over to the video. Ben Hamer, Director of Workforce Planning and People Analytics Practice here in Australia, will take over, and he'll guide you through the tool, and we'll discuss it a bit more after.
Thanks, Alex. So we
No
start
worries.
now playing the recordings that Ben indeed took last night. In case you have any questions coming up during watching the video, please include them into the Q&A in your WebEx screen, and we will be happy to discuss them after that.
My name is Ben Hamer, and I'm the Director at PwC in Sydney, Australia. And in this video, I'll be doing a quick demonstration of the Fathom platform that we use here in Australia, but that has global application as well. So Fathom is an organisation based here in Sydney, but with global reach. And the tool itself, the platform we'll go through, is also called Fathom, though it previously was called Tandem. So if you do see any material that refers to Tandem, it's just now called Fathom, and the terms can sometimes be used interchangeably. So in terms of what Fathom is, it's a machine learning powered tool that looks at forecasting the impacts of emerging technology on an organisation's workforce, so the impact of tech on jobs. It was formed, or how it was developed, it uses ONET data, which is a US Department of Jobs labour market framework. And so within that, they have over 1,000 roles because each time they deploy this to clients, they continually add to that base ONET framework. So over 1,000 roles sitting in the background, each that has 228 skills, knowledge, attributes, work context, etc., all mapped to it. And collectively, the weightings around each of those 228 and the impact of automation on those specific capabilities and attributes are aggregated when applied to the organisational data to then look at the actual impact of technology on the specific role. So what that says is that it's looking at the impacts of emerging tech on tasks, and then when those tasks are aggregated to form a particular role rather than just going straight to the role level. A few questions up front before we get underway, which often get asked when going through the Fathom platform with clients. One is around how is it developed and how confident are you within the data? The quick overview around that is to say that it was developed by Fathom, the organisation, using a subject matter expert group. And so there were a wide range of people from both industry and academia, so it is theory and theory formed of best practice enhanced. And that included experts from INSEAD Business School as well. And through various iterations, that machine learning capability that I mentioned earlier is now at a point where through historical analyses, they've been able to arrive at about a 96% confidence rating in the forecasting that comes out of this. So it's a fairly accurate platform in terms of the modelling that it does, but obviously still the caveats around talking to clients to say that it's very much about insight to inform decision making rather than anything that's overly prescriptive. And then also just a side note on that as well is that the World Economic Forum are now looking to leverage the platform and the insights in their next round of skills forecasting. In terms of privacy, it meets Australian standards, and I know that privacy is definitely a key concern for a lot of our government clients here in particular, but it has been developed with those privacy standards in mind, and those are maintained and met if it were to be deployed internationally into a foreign jurisdiction like in Europe. And in terms of then how we engage Fathom as part of our projects, the way in which it works here in Australia, and you would have to check how it works within the various PwC firms internationally, but we essentially need two contracts. So one contract for Fathom and then one contract for PwC's advisory support that sits over the top of Fathom. In terms of how Fathom calculate their fees, it's very much just based on the size of the organisation, and there isn't a massive differential between a small to large size organisation. So we've had some clients who have said that they want to look at a specific part of their organisation and run that through the Fathom platform. It's actually just more cost effective for them to do the whole organisation and drill down into the specifics, because when you sign the Fathom contract for that component of the engagement, you get 12 months access to this portal that we'll go through now. So even if you wanted to focus on one particular segment at one point in time, over that 12-month period, you can always tap back in and look at the broader workforce and other segments as well. And where PwC partner with Fathom and our value add in this process, there are really two key areas that I personally see. One is very much around the analysis and insight that comes from the data here, because what you get and what you see in this platform demonstration here is what the client gets. There's nothing more on top of this that goes into the insights around the so what and what does this mean for us in our organisation and what are the workforce strategies and the broader context applied to the findings. So that's a really important thing to note in terms of how we package it to clients. The other is to be wary that this is purely looking at the impact of emerging technology on an organisation. It doesn't take into account other broader environmental and macro trends and drivers that could shape and shift the nature of the organisation and its workforce. So what I mean by that is if there's significant population growth which is going to drive a demand for government services, that doesn't get added or augmented with this. That's analyses that we will undertake and overlay ourselves. So it's that sort of additional value add in terms of, I guess, the PwC contribution to the Fathom partnership. So that's enough of me talking. I'll jump straight into the demonstration now that you see in front of you. And this is the landing page that you get when you sign into Fathom. Essentially what happens is an organisation uploads their employee data into the file, or into the platform I should say, all de-identified in terms of names removed, but their attributes or characteristics of the incumbents who are sitting in the role are pulled in. So as you can see here, you've got two views that you go into. One's around technology implications and one's around people implications. So once you've uploaded that HR data for your workforce, essentially the data you put in is the data you get out. So if you were to put in implications, or if you were to put in descriptive data around salaries or gender or location, then these are the sorts of things you would see. But naturally, the more information you put in, the more analyses or the more sort of variations to the modelling occur. So using this hypothetical example of a UK bank, we can see here on the left-hand side of the graph that these are the salary or financial savings that the organisation would make based on salaries if roles are to be automated to the extent fully available to that organisation and its workforce as a result of emerging tech. Down the bottom is then the different divisions within that bank. So what this graph is telling us is that in terms of the current state, the salary costs are £1.55 billion collectively, so that goes down to 1.08 billion, with the greatest savings to be found in retail banking, where 18.54% of their current salary costs will actually be put towards its financial efficiency savings as a result of automation. And then the next slide, the next viewpoint is then around business unit prioritization. So this looks at the percentage of FTE at risk versus the number of FTE at risk. This is where you can start to see what is the impact proportionally on those divisions as well in terms of size. So we can see here that proportionally retail banking will have the biggest impact, and it tells you 6,068 FTE over there. Whereas you can also then see what are those that are lower impacted. So in this sense, if you were to go and pilot a particular automation initiative within the organisation, this is where you could start to see if you want to do a high impact, high value, high return one, versus if you want to go to a low impacted area to do more of a soft pilot. And then one view that the Chief Technology Officer generally tends to be quite interested in is around what's the key technology that's actually driving the automation initiatives within our organisation, or will likely. So here you've got 5 different types of technology. So process AI, social AI, mobile robotics, fixed robotics, and advanced materials. And here you can see these reflected in the graph. So what this graph is telling us is that over a 15-year period, process AI will be the primary driver of automation within the workforce based on the jobs that it has and those 228 skills, knowledge, attributes, etc. that is mapped to those. But then over time, kind of if you look probably around year 8, year 9, social AI, which is like your chatbots and whatnot, they start to play a more prominent role. And then obviously less so to your mobile, fixed robotics and advanced materials. And though in construction and other industries, you'd see this sort of almost be inversed. Where this has been important, and going back to that point around the Chief Technology Officer or the tech function being really interested in this, what's happened previously with an organisation is that they had a tech roadmap around what their technology strategy for the organisation was for the next 10 years. And then when they ran the Fathom analyses through their workforce function, they actually tapped into that and saw that social AI was going to be the primary driver of automation in their workforce, and that wasn't something they factored into their tech roadmap. So that positioned them to critically evaluate that, rethink, reflect, and refine that strategy as well. So then now going into the human capital impacts, The human capital impacts look at a few different sort of lenses or areas of analyses. So in this instance, the first viewpoint that comes up is around gender. So this is looking at, for those roles within the workforce that are at risk of automation, looking at some of the demographics and incumbents. And so in this instance, you can see that more females will be impacted than males. And this is quite interesting because in banking and in this example, there are actually more males within the workforce than females. So what we can see here is a disproportionate impact on the female population within the workforce. And this is something that we're already talking to clients about more broadly around the diversity agenda, because when we think about automation impacting the lower value type tasks within an organisation, the more repeatable process type roles, those are ones that are statistically, at least in Australia, predominantly held more so by females and people with disabilities and people from ethnically diverse backgrounds, etc. So if we were to go about an automation agenda without, diligent consideration of those incumbents within those roles, we may see an adverse impact on the diversity of our workforce as well. So something to really be considerate of, and this is really a good viewpoint around that. I think one other thing to just flag is that up here in the top right-hand corner, you're also able to filter or run sort of simulations for these, for all of these different windows as well. So here you can see that we're looking at 5 years' time, but you can also see what does that look like at year 9, year 14, 15, etc. You can look at a specific class of technology and what's driving it. You can look at location. So if you wanted to look at a specific office, you're able to filter down around that and see sort of, so in leads, again, that disproportional impact between females and males is widened. You can look at departments, ages, all sorts of things to sort of drill down that little bit further. So then one of the other things, or probably sometimes that of most interest to people within this, is the roles impacted. So looking at what is the net impact on our workforce and the specific roles within our workforce as a result of the automation. And so here what you can see within the bank, and this is looking at that 5-year period, though again you can adjust it, we can see that bank tellers will be the most impacted. So almost 45% of the bank teller workforce will be automated within that 5-year period. And then going down, loan officers, loan interviewers, etc. Another question we often get is also, what are the sorts of roles that we'll start to see disappearing from our workforce? And so that's where you can start to see a net proportional or percentage impact by clicking down here. And so while bank tellers have the overall highest reduction in workforce as in terms of net FTE, in terms of proportional FTE, credit analysts, so we can see that that's over 50% of that workforce will be automated as a result of the emerging tech. So those organisations also have regional workforces. You can look at the locations that are impacted as well. And so this is just good if you wanted to look at sort of whether or not you would look at, say, for example, closing down a particular office or consolidating your property footprint, whatever that may be. And then finally, I'll go into the job corridor, which is really important from a competency modelling perspective. So the job corridor looks at, on the left-hand side, some of the roles that are high risk or most at risk of automation within the organisation. So these are hierarchically ranked here. And so if I was to click on a tax preparer, on the right-hand side, it then hierarchically links all of those roles that are least at risk of automation, but where there is a skill, knowledge, ability, activity, and context alignment to that tax preparer role. So in terms of the tax preparer, which is at 93% risk of automation, the role that will likely remain that has the highest skill alignment is a financial services sales agent. So when you click on that, down here, it then tells you what are the specific attributes to that role that require a capability uplift in order to retrain and redeploy someone into that role. So if you look at skills, again, you go through knowledge, abilities, work activities, and work context. And the orange line just indicates a method of prioritization. So those, if you were to go through and look at what are the specific ones, given that there are quite a few there, if you focus on the orange, that's essentially the capability uplift plan or the learning intervention required to support a tax preparer to retrain and reskill to then be redeployed into a financial services sales agent role. Similarly, we can see that janitors are also equally the highest at-risk role. So if you were to click on that, we can then see on the right-hand side within the bank, we don't have any roles that map across to that, and therefore that's a role, or the incumbents within that role will likely need to be made redundant, or a more considered plan about transitioning and exiting is required around that. So in terms of the Fathom platform, that's essentially it, and that's the demonstration as it is. So thank you so much for listening and going through that. If you do have any questions about this at all and want to have a conversation, whether or not you can think of a client that you'd want to apply it to, or just have any other specifics about the platform itself, please feel free to reach out to me. My email address is ben.hamer@pwc.com. And more than happy to have a conversation via email, phone, whatever's easier, and really support some of our global colleagues in using this platform. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Ben unfortunately was unable to join us live, so hence the recording, and we will make sure that you get contact details at the end. So Alexander, this tool that really seems to fill that space where there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and really gives that structured view in terms of the from to. What's your experience of how clients and organisations are responding to this?
Well, it's actually I think there's a big tactical focus and catching up, especially in Australia, and interested to hear views from Europe, but catching up on implementing those big, SAP, Oracle, or traditional transformation journeys with more traditional IT, and even IT is not looking that far ahead, which also quite often means that workforce like HR, but also senior executives, are not looking that far ahead. And I think based on all these expert views coming together, and that's what Fathom is really built upon, and all these expert views on viewing on automation in combination with machine learning, is really starting to develop a view on that. And it's not to say that that view is perfect by any means, because it's a scenario. We're trying to predict the future, but it's something that hasn't been done in such a detailed way before, at least not to my knowledge.
Yeah. And if you're, I suppose, if I think about the people who are watching this and thinking about, oh my goodness, wouldn't that insight be amazing for my organisation? How much effort is it to get to some of those reports? Like, how do you actually get your data into the tool to get that kind of level of insight?
Well, you don't even have to be that advanced along the maturity curve that was shown. I would say if you have basic information on your job roles, their description, preferably geography and, of course, FTE and pay linked to that, you can already start to build that picture. Because the machine learning tool is trained on so many different jobs and skill sets, and it's getting smarter and smarter every week, every month. It will take that data and, assisted by some very capable analysts, look at what those roles really mean. So I would say it's quite advanced tool, and it just requires those basic data extracts we know, like CSV files and Excel files, to put into the system, which Fathom and we will help you with.
Yeah. And then Ben was saying, I suppose he was kind of like, well, what's our role at the end of it? You get this insight. what do you like? How are organisations responding to this? Like, it sort of begs the question. So what? So what do I do? What should I be thinking about? What is there a typical organisational response that you see?
Well, I would say, as you mentioned and Dan mentioned as well, this is not a silver bullet, this tool. I think there's a process you go through, which we've seen with clients a bit, who are starting to take that step to look beyond the next year or two. And when we really look at the strategic workforce planning, this is a process. So as Ben said, you have to feed in all these other strategic considerations. We looked at the bank as an example, and we know that the number of clerks is decreasing, compliance staff are decreasing due to AI. But for instance, if there's an international expansion, how do you cope with that? And that's not necessarily incorporated in the tool. So I think the value of like PwC, but also just in general working with these tools, is that, okay, you take the tool and then further down the chain, you start to analyze and put that data into context. And that requires some interpretation of qualitative data, interpretation of strategic plans. But I would say that's the process we would go through and most organizations would go through.
Yeah. And please, if there's anyone in the webinar, please feel free to add your questions in now around any of the topics that we've covered today. I suppose there was something else that struck me around what Ben said, and I think I suppose increasingly a topic that's occupying my mind, but around that gender impact, that disproportionate impact on gender when you look at a bank where they already have a sort of an uneven gender ratio, and then you're saying actually that's what. Have you seen any organisations who've really been shocked into action by seeing that disproportionate action, and what's your view on the implications for the future? Are you still there, Alexander, or have I lost you?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought there was a question to the group, but just quickly from me, I would say we've worked with a couple of clients who've only figured this out as they went along, and that's, I think, that shows the importance of planning for this, is where you suddenly make, to look at the banking example in Fathom, say in a UK bank you create some redundancies and suddenly realize that gender inequality is going up. Your workforce becomes less diverse, and that's the impact that you can quite often predict if you would look further ahead than a year or 2 years.
Okay. Super. Thank you ever so much for joining us all the way from Australia. We, as predicted, we haven't got any more questions come through. We're happy to connect afterwards. So thank you very much for joining us. We've actually used up our full hour. We're 2 minutes short. But so we're all going to need some cheer in January when the winter is fully set in. So Linda, what will we talking about on our next webinar in January?
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Well, in January, end of January, we're going to talk about another important topic that many organizations are struggling with. Is really how can we use data to kind of predict who is on risk of leaving. And how can we actually make our people happy, for example, with the reward packages that we offer? Because often the discussions in companies, what they offer, the reward packages are about the cost. You have several elements, and they're looking from a cost perspective what they will offer to the employees. So 1,000 more in attribute A will mean 1,000 less or 900 less in another one. But it actually is not really looking at the value that the employees give to the different attributes. So we are going to look from two different perspectives. One really based on the data that's already there, and the other perspective is really designing a very smart way of surveying. So you don't need any data from the beginning to measure that preference that people have in a company for different workforce or benefit elements.
Very good. Excellent. Looking forward to it, Linda. So thank you again, Alexander. Thanks, Chantal and Sabina from our team in Amsterdam, and also to everyone who joined us today. We will be sending out the link if you'd like to. Please feel free also to share that with colleagues or friends who might be interested in this topic. And we look forward season's greetings. I hope you all have a good, successful conclusion to the year, and we look forward to connecting with you all again in January.